thank you for joining us today for this special encore presentation of the Ward 8 Democrats Candidate Forum for DC Delegate to Congress, at-large council member and council chair. I am Troy Dante Presswood, president of the Ward 8 Democrats, and I'm joined here with my friend and colleague Marcus Batchelor, who's the chair of the Membership and Voter Engagement Committee. All right, let's talk about the at-large race. You have incumbent Anita Bond. She's facing off against Nate Fleming, who is the former shadow U.S. rep and a legislative aide for Councilmember Wright. He also won a Ward 8 straw poll, I should point out. You have Lisa Gore. She's a former federal law enforcement officer and an ANC commissioner out of Ward 4. And you have Dexter Williams, who is the current Ward 7 committee man on the DC Democratic State Committee and a former legislative aide for Councilmember Robert Wright. How is this race shaping up, you think?
I think it's a great field of candidates. I mean, I think it says something that for a citywide field, you have such a deeply rich black field of candidates, both young and more seasoned. You've got half of the field living east of the Anacostia River. So the richness of conversation in the race, in the at-large race, has been great. And I think, when you look at how Ward 8 Democrats really see citywide representation, I think you see a lot of the conversation about poverty and about transportation safety, about how we address some of the deepest divides in our city, really take center stage in that race, and I think we're better for it. So it's a really exciting race. It's going to be a close one, I think.
All right, well, we'll have to take a look at that because it looks like the incumbent who is squaring off against several candidates, usually that's advantage incumbent, but this time there seems to be a lot more energy in that race than we've seen in the years past, so we will have to watch that closely. So real quick, Marcus, the council chair race, longtime council member and Chairman Phil Mendelson is up against strong competition from ANC Commissioner Erin Palmer. With only two candidates in that race, this will be a choice election.
It will be a choice election, and I think that's really exciting. I think what you see is there's been a lot of conversation in this election and in past elections about kind of the political divide between what people see as more moderate and what people see as progressive. This chair's race is actually a fight to define what progressive means in the city, and that is a really interesting race to watch. Obviously we also know that the chairman has outsized power and responsibility when it comes to wrangling their 12 other colleagues to get things done. And so I think it's really an interesting match to see how Chairman Mendelson and Commissioner Palmer really set their vision for how they lead the council and what impact it might have on the city and its politics. So it's one to watch.
I agree with you, one to watch. Well, thank you, Marcus, for your insights. And now we want you to see for yourself how these candidates answer the questions from Ward 8 Democratic voters. Feel free to post your comments or live tweet with us, because we're going to be live tweeting as well, even though this is an encore presentation, using the hashtag Ward8Votes. And so on behalf of all of us here at the Ward 8 Democrats, I want to thank you for joining us here. And now our encore presentation for the Candidate Forum for DC Delegate to Congress, at-large council, and council chair.
Go vote.
So in keeping with our voter education mission, we are pleased to present today's virtual forum for candidates seeking the position of delegate to Congress, at-large council member, and council chair. We want to squeeze all three into it. This is the first of two forums that we have scheduled in advance of the June 21st Democratic primary. I do want to recognize today's sponsors. It's brought to you in part by the DC Democratic Party and from the east of the river, Hill Rags newspaper. Okay, let's get to the forum, and let me introduce our moderator. James Wright Jr. is no stranger to us here at the Ward 8 Democrats. He is a staff writer for the Washington Informer. He has worked for the Informer since December 2018, after previously working as a freelancer for the newspaper for 5 years. Prior to the Informer, James was a writer and city editor for the Washington Afro-American newspaper, covering Capitol Hill, the White House, and local sports. He also worked at the Washington Post at the sports copy desk in the early 2000s. James has traveled extensively to Africa, the UK, Rome, Libya, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Ghana as a journalist. And he's interviewed such notables as Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, Vice President Al Gore, South African President Thabo Mbeki, and many African-American leaders, including members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and he resides in the Washington, D.C. area. So without further ado, James, is yours.
First of all, I want to thank you, Troy Presswood, for inviting the Washington Informer to have the chance to moderate this panel. We want to thank you and the executive committee for this. And we definitely want to thank the audience for taking time out of their busy schedules on this beautiful day to hear about the future of our city. And as you alluded to, Troy, the future of our country. I would like to set some ground rules for the debate that will take place. And as Troy said, I will be moderating the DC delegate for the US Congress, the at-large council member position, and for council chairman. Here in the district, every 2 years, we elect two at-large council members. One tends to come from the Democratic Party, the other tends to come from non-democratic, I'll put it that way. And we do that both in presidential years and non-presidential years, which is what this is. And we have, in terms of candidates, presently right now, we have the incumbent Anita Bonds. We have challenger Lisa Gore. We have challenger Dexter Williams. And that is all that I see for right now. So we will proceed in terms of who we have. The rules are that you get a 1 minute opening statement, and you get 1 minute to respond to questions. But as time goes by during the debate, they will be shortened to 30 seconds, and special questions will be shortened to 30 seconds. Rebuttals will take place specifically if a person mentions another candidate, and that candidate has the chance to rebut what their opponent said. And as I said before, questions to these candidates can be posed in the Q&A section in Zoom and on the hashtag Ward8Votes. And so we're going to get right into this. Our timer is doing very well and is being very strict. So try to keep your answers, candidates, succinct and straight to the point. That will help everybody, and we will get a lot of questions in. Let me just start with opening statements. I would like to start for kind of consistency. Lisa Gore, 1 minute opening statement, please. Ms. Gore?
Yes, I'm here. Just ran into a technical difficulty with my video, but my name is, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Lisa Gore, and I'm a third generation Washingtonian. I've lived throughout Washington, D.C., including wards 1 and 5, and I currently live in the Hawthorne section of Ward 4. I'm a D.C. public school mom to a very proud 17-year-old senior. I am a current ANC commissioner. I'm vice chair of ANC 34G in Chevy Chase, and I'm a retired federal law enforcement officer. I spent over 20 plus years investigating housing fraud and holding housing authorities, housing communities responsible under the law for over 20 plus years throughout the United States. I want to thank Ward 8 Democrats for holding this forum. It's a great opportunity to talk about the issues that are in Ward 8 and how we can make Ward 8 a better community, how we can make DC a better community for all. I'm happy to talk about my platform, including my focus on housing, transportation policies, economic justice, as well as environmental justice. I'm looking forward to this discussion today and looking forward to sharing my ideas with the community.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. Councilmember Bonds, please.
Okay, yes. Good afternoon, Ward 8. It's a pleasure to join you today. As many of you know, I grew up east of the river, and this community I consider raised me. and contributed so much to who I am today, including the many memories of organizing and creating positive results for residents in the community, especially while working for Mayor Barry and most recently working with my colleague on the council, Councilmember Trayon White. The values that I attained back in the day are more important than ever because we Washingtonians are seeing our power diminished. I want to assure you I'm doing the work to make sure that we slow the loss of DC residents. We are gaining and were gaining until the pandemic hit DC, and many taxpayers moved from the city because remote work has become a big option. And so we're now moving into the new normal to produce more affordable housing, mixed income housing, neighborhood amenities, reliable, low-cost transportation options and services so seniors can age in place and our students can receive quality learning leading to higher education and good paying jobs, and to devote more attention to the healthcare needs of residents, young mothers, children, and seniors. And finally, as a co-introducer of the NEAR Act, I want you to know that it is important that we move faster to curtail neighborhood crime and gun violence. And I expect to talk further with you today about these and other issues important to you. I'm here to hear from you today and to learn what else we need to do in our great city to continue to make it a absolutely wonderful home for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Bonds. And in proper order, Mr. Williams, your 1 minute opening statement.
Thank you, James. And also I want to thank the Ward 8 Democrats for hosting the forum today. And also want to thank my colleagues who are running in this race for being here as well. I am Dexter Williams, running for at-large council. I'm a native Washingtonian and Ward 7 resident. My mother is a retired DC public schools teacher, and my father worked as a corrections officer for the DC Department of Corrections. My career has spanned across both the private and public sectors. I have served as a legislative staffer on the DC Council. I also played a key role in passing the Restore the Vote bill and also creating the DC Fair Elections program, which most candidates in this race are participating in. My priorities are to enhance the quality and reimagine our entire educational infrastructure, provide deeply affordable housing, develop and increase opportunities for our small businesses, and protect our communities. So I'm looking forward to today's discussions. I'm looking forward to hearing what's important to you, and also looking forward to working with you in the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And last but not least, Mr. Nate Bennett Fleming. You have 1 minute for an opening statement, Mr. Fleming.
Thank you so much, James. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today. The Ward 8 Democrats. I'm a son of Ward 8. I was born and raised by a single mother, grew up in Anacostia, DC, but educational opportunity took me to Morehouse College. I was able to become a lawyer, studying at Berkeley, got a full scholarship to Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And I believe when someone from our community gets those type of opportunities, they have a responsibility to come back and try to create opportunities for others. And that's what I've been doing. I served as DC's shadow representative to Congress. And for the past 5 years, I've been a committee director and a legislative director at the DC Council, working with the Ward 8 council member. I'm very proud. A lot of people and a lot of candidates can talk about what they want to do, or they can name the issues, but they can't speak to about what they've done. And I'm proud to create the Ward 7, Ward 8 Dream Grants program that's put over $1 million in the pocket of entrepreneurs east of the river. The Ward 7, Ward 8 Restaurants Bill, which led to funding for 9 new restaurants to be opening up east of the river. I led to Bard Early College High School being created and put in Ward 7, moving to Ward 8, where students in 4 years can earn not only their high school degree, but have 2 years of college completed. And finally, when there were 20 schools, most of them east of the river, that were underfunded, I was the staffer that led the fight to get them funded. When the United Medical Center was gutted in $25 million of funding, I was the staffer that led that fight. So I look forward to talking to you guys about what our vision is for the future, but also what we can do to make our communities stronger and more vibrant. Thank you so much. And finally, I'm in my car today because I'm out knocking doors. We've knocked 16,000 doors thus far. So we have to make sure that every Saturday and Sunday we're out knocking doors. So I'm doing this debate from the car today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleming. And I have the prerogative as the moderator to ask a couple of questions, but really I'm going to ask one because we have a robust set of questions from the viewers. Kenya McDuffie was kicked off the ballot in term by the DC Board of Elections because he did not have the proper qualifications, they said, for Attorney General. As a council member, and I'd like to start with Council Member Bonds, and then we'll go around from there. Will you support legislation if that is the proper way to open it up for more people to run for Attorney General? Council Member Bonds.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. And I think we all should have anticipated getting that question from you, Mr. Wright, given your history reporting. It's a very important question. And I think the key word is if it is the right process to move forward with. So if it's the right process to move forward with, I will certainly be there with my colleagues to look at the issue and to cast a vote.
And I rarely do this. In a backup, Council Member Bonds, and others, please respond to this when it's your chance. Would you be willing to, and this is crazy, but would you be willing to utilize emergency legislation for that?
Well, given the circumstances, I think emergency legislation is the only way to make the change, if that is the proper thing to do, because we are currently involved in the election. But as a rule of thumb, these kinds of issues are very important. And I feel more comfortable hearing from the public. And that's why we have our roundtables and the hearings on specific legislations. But I do understand the circumstances, you know, and things change. So sometimes you may have to go to this measure, but it is not my comfort level.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Bonds. Let me jump and go to reverse order. Mr. Fleming, how would you respond to the Kenyon McDuffie situation? And do you believe emergency legislation is needed for him to get on the ballot?
Well, this is an example where the law that was written is not clear as to whether a lawyer that serves as a member of the council is eligible to run for Attorney General. I believe that as a member of the council, someone that wants to run for Attorney General has the opportunity to ask for clarity, has the opportunity to try to change that law before they run. So I believe that if I was on the council, I would not move forward with emergency legislation because it would be viewed as being favorable towards a colleague in an election. And we have to make sure that we elect people with integrity. And in this instance, I would do the integrous thing.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Ms. Gore, how would you work in this particular situation?
So first of all, let me say right now that, you know, we know that Kenyon McDuffie is going before district court because he's appealed this decision, which I believe will give the community a lot more clarity in terms of where the district court will rule. So there might not even need to be an opportunity to change this legislation, and depending on that district court ruling. I also want to point out this was a council bill. It was written with unclarity. And if I was a sitting council member, I would absolutely not intervene in this process at this point in time. And I want to make that clear. I don't want to do doublespeak. I would not intervene. And I think that is very important for the reasons said. We want to operate with integrity and we want to operate with transparency. So there was a process for this. The candidates went through the process, and now we're going to, see firsthand how it plays out under the court of law. And I believe that's where we should let it lay.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. Mr. Williams, what are your thoughts on this particular, I'll call it the Kenyon McDuffie controversy?
No, thank you, James. And it's a big one. And I do appreciate the question, but I agree with my colleagues. I don't think it's appropriate to introduce emergency legislation, although I would note that the council most recently introduced and passed emergency legislation to allow teachers to run for State Board of Education, which I fully support. But where's the emergency? And so I think there's a bit of contradiction with the council, but I do agree that we should not be passing the emergency bill in this particular situation. The second thing I would say is this is in the courts now, so we will see what they say, but also even to Ms. Gore's point, the council has to do a better job in being clear and precise in what it wants. I think that this is what led us to this situation. You talk to some attorneys, they will say, well, the court will rule in favor of King and McDuffie. Then some attorneys will say that they won't rule in favor. So I think that's an indication of how vague the law is, but also it's an indication of how clear and how we need to write better laws.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. That concludes my question. So now we will go to the questions of who's the most important persons in terms of this panel, which are the people. And I would like to start this questioning again. I'll reverse it with Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, there is a housing shortage across the city, but there's a housing shortage in Ward 8, and particularly for low and moderate residents of the ward. As a member of the council, what will you do in order to alleviate that problem, particularly for low and moderate income residents?
Yeah, housing is a big issue. And I think the first thing that we need to do, and I say this at every forum, I talk to residents about this, the very first thing that we have to do is provide better oversight over our housing agencies. But also the second thing we have to do is we have to be innovative. There are a number of vacant properties around the city, particularly in Ward 8, that I think that we need to explore. I know Chairman Mendelson is looking at this. I think we need to look at that and see what is it that we can do to buy the property and also provide housing for residents. And so that would be my number one priority specifically for Ward 8, but also working with the Ward 8 council member and identifying housing opportunities, because it takes 7 votes to get a bill passed, and then you need 9 votes for a veto overproof. But you have to work in conjunction with the Ward 8 council member and support the council member to advance causes and issues in the ward. But that would be my approach.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Council Member Bonds, do I need to repeat the question, or?
I think, Mr. Wright, I'm kind of familiar with this arena of housing. I chair the committee and have for some time, and I'm proud of the work that we have done in the committee. And as it relates to affordability of housing, it's an issue across the city. Ward 8 is no different. However, we have, as a government, placed much of our affordable housing in Ward 8. And when I talk to community, I frequently hear, how about some workforce housing, some housing for moderate and higher income persons, so that we can have the amenities that we want. We all know that as organizations are thinking about locating grocery stores and retail in a community, even restaurants, it is about the disposable income that residents have as to whether or not they make that decision. And so it is important for Ward 8 to also have workforce housing. There's a draft of that across the city, particularly in this neighborhood, that certainly has done its fair share of having affordable housing. Also, we have a new opportunity with the Navy Yard joining Ward 8. There's approximately 30 to 40% vacancy in some of those buildings. And it just seems like this is an opportunity to utilize those units and to put some of our moderate, low-income, moderate households in those properties. And so I'm working on a idea regarding that and have actually mentioned it to the council member. I think that's the way for us to go in the immediate.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Mr. Fleming, would you like to, well, of course you will, but what is your response to this question?
Yes, thank you. Well, I'd like to first note that, as Councilmember Bonds says, she's been head of the Housing Committee for a long time, close to a decade. And DC has the highest rate of Black gentrification in the city. We have the least affordable housing market of any major city in the country, and it speaks to the need for new leadership. So what are we going to do if we were able to serve as a member of the council? Well, one thing I would focus on rent control. As a council staffer, I wrote a bill to expand rent control. No building that is built after 1975 is currently eligible for rent control. We need to increase home ownership, particularly Black home ownership. That's something that I've worked on at the council. Also worked on funding the first community land trust here in DC, the Douglas Community Land Trust, which is focusing on keeping housing permanently affordable, particularly here in Ward 8. But finally, we need displacement-free zones. Like I said, we have the highest level of Black displacement in the country. And it's here in Ward 8 where the battleground is for that. So we have to make sure we're doing things like making sure property taxes are reasonable, don't go up, making sure that we have freezes and organizers in place to make sure that people don't have their rights taken away. TOPA, the opportunity to purchase your apartment or building when it's up for sale. We had single family TOPA that was stripped during this council session from Councilmember Bonds' Housing Committee, where residents that rent homes in Ward 8, most people are renters in Ward 8. They do not have the right now to purchase those homes when they go on the sale. Those are the type of things that we have to stop, but we have to elect leadership that's willing to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Commissioner Gore.
I love this question, and I love it because this is something that I've done my entire life. I said I was third generation Washingtonian in my family, and pretty much every generation besides me has been displaced. My granddad was displaced out of Schism Quarter. When I've been on the campaign trail and I've talked to people about their involvement with housing and the way things are going, most people are very unhappy in the city. That's from Ward 3, 2, 1, 4 on down to 8. I don't think there's probably any Washingtonians that are looking for affordable housing that are comfortable with the situation that we're in right now. We're not doing enough. I've spent 20 years conducting federal oversight, public housing authorities, community development organizations all across this nation. It's one issue that I know. Oversight of this issue is one thing that I know. I'm the only person on this panel that has done this professionally before the Congress of the United States, answering to every taxpayer in this country, including those in Washington, D.C. My platform is very robust in this area. It absolutely calls for greater oversight, particularly of our Housing Production Trust Fund, which is the #1 source of funding for deeply affordable housing in this city. The oversight of that area has been very bad. I also call for rent control, converting office space for housing so that we can use housing in a different area. Community land trusts, creating new legislation where those land trusts or buildings go into a land trust and that we can use that. And in addition to that, making sure that we focus on public housing. As someone that's had oversight for public housing for years, that is a critical source of housing for us for deeply, and we talk deeply, I'm talking about 0 to 30%. Black income in DC is between 0 and 50%. So even though we talk about market rate units, a lot of the people that are being left behind are the people in DC that look like us. And we have to change that. This election is critical. We have to change that, as well as focus on anti-displacement efforts through legislation.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. I believe I've covered that in terms of that question. I think everybody's answered that question. My next question is I'm going to combine two questions. Number one, part A, I should say. The mayor made a request for more police funding, and as most of you all know, the Allen's committee basically cut $6 million of that. What do you think of that? And B, do you support a regional approach to fighting crime? For this particular, let me start with the Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you for that question. Yes, I do support a regional approach to fighting crime. I think we reached that point. We hear of these incidents happening not just in the district, but in the various surrounding counties. And in my opinion, it will escalate it's like anything else. If you don't put a cap on it, it continues. Now, how do we prevent the escalation? That's the big issue. And I think we need all hands on the table. We need all of us there to make decisions. And I think we need more input from the community in general. As it relates to the cuts that were made, not really cuts, just the money was redirected to some of the areas where spending has been greater, such as funding for domestic violence victims and to help in that arena. Monies that were redirected from the quote unquote police budget were monies that were allocated in anticipation of more officers joining who would need to have use of a vehicle. And so that's what was redirected. And we know that we currently have about 13% of our officers actually are DC residents. If you are a non-DC resident, you do not get use of our vehicles. So you can do the math and you can see where there may have been monies put in a pot, but a pot that we so seldom get to use.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Barnes. You were very clear. Commissioner Gore, could you answer the question, please?
Yes. I would start out by saying that I think when we're talking about MPD funding or funding of any government agency, we have to critically look at that issue and critically look at those funding sources. So I am in favor of the redirecting of those funds. I think they went towards good purposes. And in general, in terms of a regional effort to crime fighting, that's not something that we just reached the point of. We've been needing that push for years. Most jurisdictions have a regional approach to crime fighting. We border 2 states, Maryland and Virginia, so we really cannot partnership or get to the point where we want to see a reduction in crime without partnering with those states. A lot of our crime, especially carjackings, they're interjurisdictional. That's something I know very well in terms of those types of approaches. So I absolutely support that. And I think we're probably going to have to do a whole lot more of that and make sure that we have strong partnerships across not only our bordering states, but also some of our southern states. As you know, that's a very major source of gun trafficking into DC. A lot of that comes from the southern states.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. Mr. Fleming, in terms of DC's regional approach to fighting crime and the mayor's and the between Charles Allen and the mayor in terms of a $6 million cut. Your response, sir.
Yes, thank you. As many of you know, I was a victim of a carjacking at gunpoint in January of this year. As someone that's grown up in Ward 8, nothing like that's ever happened to me, but it speaks to our ability to elect leadership that's had the same lived experiences of the problems that we're trying to solve. And that was actually committed by some teenagers from Maryland, which speaks to our regional need. We already have a regional carjacking task force that was set up last year. I believe we need to expand our regional approaches. That's something we definitely need to do. But when you ask me, I believe our problem with public safety is a problem of our young people, a reflection of our young people being in crisis. So what we have to do is do things like erase educational inequality, give them economic opportunities, give them access to healthcare. I have a vision of universal after school for every DC youth. I want to make the summer youth employment program year round to engage thousands of DC's teenagers. Only 14 out of every 100 students that start DC public school graduate from college. So we need to connect the 18 through 29-year-old with guaranteed jobs. So that's my vision, to connect and engage our young people, not just during the school year or during the school day, but all year and all day. And that's the type of things that we have to do to address public safety from a comprehensive perspective. And that's what I want to do as a member of the DC Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Mr. Williams, your response.
Thank you, James. Yes, I do support the redirection and reallocation of resources from MPD to other programs. It was in the police commissioner's report, so I'm definitely in favor of it. And in terms of to your second question about the regional support, I don't regional coordination. I don't know why it took us so long to get here. I mean, this has been going on for a number of years. And so I agree, we do need a regional approach. When you look at the carjackings, when you look at other violent crimes, a lot of those residents that are committing those crimes are not even DC residents. They're coming from mostly Maryland and some for Virginia. So I definitely support a regional approach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. We're going to dovetail a little bit to education. I found this question very interesting. The University of the District of Columbia taking on new roles. For example, UDC possibly acquiring the Graduate School USA and UDC having a School of Medicine. I would just like your thoughts on that. And for this one, we will start with Mr. Williams again and go back around.
Absolutely, I support this. You know, I used to work at Howard University in government relations, and one of the things that made academic offerings of School of Medicine is graduate school. And so I think that this is an opportunity for us to reimagine UDC and expand it. Because, you know, when I was growing up, you know, everyone used to look at UDC and say, oh, that's not a good school. No one wants to go there. And so I think that this is a great opportunity for us to expand our footprint in the academic space. So I fully support it.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Gore?
Yeah, thanks for this wonderful question. My son is making college decisions right now, so this is real important to me. And I do agree that we should expand UDC as much as possible. I love the idea of, as someone coming from the federal service who's taken a ton of USDA classes, I would love to see that taken over by UDC, as well as medical school. The one thing that I would add to this, I think it's really important, and being a mom of, you know, a kid that's a senior right now going through this process, is we need to make sure that our kids can get into UDC and can, you know, go and attend tuition free. I'm a big proponent of that. I paid my nephew's college tuition, and you hear a lot of the young people talk about the exorbitant costs and it being cost prohibitive. It is absolutely, the fees are enormous. So I would like to not only see that expansion of programming, but I would like for all of our kids in DC, especially our public kids, because we know the state of education in DC public schools, to be guaranteed access and entry to UDC as well as free tuition. They deserve that.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you again for this question. I'm very excited with the expansion of programming at the university. It's our land grant institution, and it's very important to us, and important to us because this gives us an opportunity to be on a par with the other jurisdictions around the country. I don't like to call them states because we're not a state, but you know, certainly it moves us in this direction. We have, as a city, over the last few decades, given not as much attention to the university as we should have. And with the ranking of the law school being number 5 in the country, that ought to tell us that we have something very important going on here in the city with education. So I look forward to the expansions that we have mentioned, but even more so. And I especially want to see us put more emphasis on jobs training in some very specific categories, the categories where we actually have jobs in this city. We have hundreds of jobs, thousands of jobs, but many of our residents do not take advantage of them or cannot because they are not trained in certain categories. And so I'd like to see us do more with that approach. And of course, that means too, we've got to increase the endowment. Many of us graduate from other schools and give money to other schools and other jurisdictions, but not to UDC, our home school.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Bonds. And now we're going to talk about Initiative 82. I'm sorry. Please go ahead, Mr. Fleming. I'm sorry.
Thank you. On each of these issues, the council members should be telling us what they've done on this issue. She's been in the council for 10 years. On the issue of UDC, I wrote a bill to make tuition free at the University of District of Columbia. It has not passed the council. It would cost us about $22 million a year to do that. I think we should. I was a law professor at the University of District of Columbia's law school. We need to make sure we're not the 5th ranked law school yet. We're 5th in terms of the clinical programs at UDC. I'm getting my doctorate in higher education at the University of Pennsylvania. So this is an important issue to me. As I said, only 14 of every 100 kids that start a DC public high school graduate college. So one thing we have to do to fix that is create a stronger pipeline to the UDC. I agree with Lisa. We should make interest requirements and tuition free for that university, but we also need to expand the offerings. I think I agree with expanding the medical school, but we need an engineering school. We need a technical school. We need online programs so residents all across the city can learn these skills without having to leave their job. I also want to expand UDC. We have a small site in Ward 8, but the RFK facility, that's a perfect place to bring UDC fully east of the river, so more residents are close to the education that they need. So these are the innovative ideas. And on each of these issues, people should be telling you what they've done, not just naming a couple of platitudes or a couple of ideas, but what have they done and what are they going to do? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleming, and I apologize for that. There's a perception among some in the city that the police department is corrupt. And I don't know how true that is, but as a member of the council, would you talk about what you would do to fight corruption in the DC Police Department? Can we start with Commissioner Gore on this one?
Yes, and thank you. This is also a critically important question and something that's close to me as well. I've spent over my entire law enforcement career in the federal service has been close to 30 years. I was a senior manager. I've done all types of work in this area. I am also one of the few or only candidates that had on public record press releases about the recent MPD refusal to fire the 24 officers that were found to have committed crimes. So you will find me as a resident of DC that is extremely outspoken on this issue, and I would be just as extremely outspoken on it as a member of the council with actual experience in the oversight of police conduct. We cannot afford to have an MPD that's violating women officers' rights, that are violating citizens' rights. Policing is at a critical junction in our country and particularly in our community. We saw the responses to the protesters this summer, and we have to have a strong council that upholds accountability to this agency and its leadership. We cannot be silent on this issue. So I would be very aggressive on that issue. We can support our MPD, but we have to hold them accountable to the law. As a former member of law enforcement, we have to even be more accountable than the general public. That is the only way to gain the trust that we can possibly hope to have from the public and their cooperation. So we must be tough on this issue. I fully support the NEAR Act. I wish it was implemented by the council as well as the Police Reform Commissioners Act. I think that is a first step that we need to do, is make sure those acts and recommendations from the task force are implemented, and that starts with the council.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. Let me jump to Mr. Fleming on this particular issue. How would you clean up if there's corruption in the police department?
Well, I mean, I've taken some steps on that as a council staffer, but I mean, we've had some really upsetting revelations recently. A former Ward 8 ANC commissioner, Anthony Lorenzo Green, was on a list of people that would not have their information requests received from the police department. So that speaks to how there's a culture of a lack of transparency there. If people can't get information, then we can't solve our problems. There was a Ward 8 mom, the mother of Marquise Austin, that came into our office one time, and her son was a victim of a police homicide, but she couldn't get access to the body camera footage. So we passed an emergency bill 2 weeks later to expand access to body camera footage so that there would be more transparency. So that's an example of a Ward 8 resident coming in with the problem and us creating a legislative solution for that. But there's so much that we can do as a member of the council, not just simply as a council staffer. We've never elected someone from Ward 8 to an at-large council seat, even though the problems in our city are more potent in our ward. We have an opportunity to elect Ward 8's own. to a at-large council seat. I asked Ward 8 residents to elect someone from your community that's going to bring attention to the issues of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Mr. Williams, what are you going to do, or what would you like to do to clean up corruption in the police department?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think we got to really strongly push to implement the police commissioner's recommendation. I know the council is looking at, putting in an auditor and MPD, which I fully support. But I don't know why we spent spent all this money on producing this report and not working toward actually implementing some of the key recommendations in the report. It is absolutely outrageous that we have MPD seemingly doing whatever they want and just getting away with it. We have to be very aggressive about this. We can't just pass laws and don't implement them. We can't just commission reports and then put them on the shelves and collect dust as is common in the government. So when I'm council member, I'm going to be very aggressive about this issue. I'm going to be pushing my colleagues to implement a lot of the changes that we all agree is needed with MPD, and also looking at how do we change the culture within MPD, because that's what's key here. It's the culture of the institution. It's not just the policies that you have, but how they respond, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And so that's going to be my focus.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Councilmember Barnes, how would you clean up the police department in terms of corruption?
Well, we have a great opportunity finally with the police chief Conti. He's been through the mill. That is, he came up in the ranks in the department, and he knows that there are some outstanding issues. I would start first with making sure that he follows through, doing something quite different from his predecessors, and that is that he takes action against those officers that have already been identified as problem officers. I think he has to do that. I think that helps to restore faith in and trust in the community. Secondly, I just want to point out, everyone's talking about the NEAR Act. Well, I'm a co-introducer of that. So I clearly have a strong feeling about how public safety needs to play out in our community. And I am the co-introducer of the Police Reform Commission that set that body up. So I'm there and doing what I can in my capacity as a council member. But when we talk about police corruption and those what we call bad actors in law enforcement, we have to take action against them. Yes, it will diminish the number of officers we may have on the force, but we really have to show to the officers that that type of behavior cannot be tolerated by anyone. And so that's my response.
Thank you very much. We have a little less than 10 minutes, and we're actually doing extremely well on time. I have a specific question for Mr. Fleming. And in terms of this, if you all wish to respond, his opponents wish to respond, you'll have 30 seconds to do so. Mr. Fleming, you'll have a minute to respond to the question, and the challengers 30 seconds. Basically, they're talking about when you were the DCPS internship program, and they want to know, why is it that you didn't work to make sure it was a year-round program for youth who particularly needed that? Could you explain that?
No, I can't explain that. I was never a DCPS intern program or coordinator or anything of that sort.
Interesting. Very interesting. So, sounds like somebody has given you a job that you never had.
Yeah, maybe that question was for another candidate. Maybe there's another Nathan in this race. But no, my only positions in DC government, I was elected as shadow representative to Congress. I served from 2013 to 2015. I ran for this seat against Councilmember Bonds in 2014, finishing in second place. For the past 4.5 years, I worked as a council. For the first 2 years as a legislative director for the Ward 8 council member, and for the 2 years before I ran for this office as the committee director on the Committee of Recreation, Libraries, and Youth Affairs.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fleming. Well, let's get to something we all know about, Initiative 82, and this has to do with tip workers. Please, could you tell us what your position is on Initiative 82? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's start this one with the council member.
Thank you for that question. I am going to be where the community is on this issue. I think the pandemic has taught us that everyone needs to have fair wages. And so that would be my response.
Thank you very much. Mr. Williams, could you respond on Initiative 82?
Yes, I fully support it. We need to have fair wages. I've been a longtime supporter of it, and so I'm looking forward to voting in favor of it in November.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Gore?
Yes, I'm definitely in favor of this initiative. As you know, a lot of the tip workers are female, a lot of them are Black. So I think this will give our tip workers a leg up. If I'm a sitting member on the council, I will also not overwrite the people's will. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Fleming?
Yes, I think it's important, like Lisa said, to understand why we have to vote for this. The residents already voted for this, but the council overturned the will of the people to have the tip minimum wage in. And like like Lisa Gore said, this affects Black women. And Councilmember Bonds, I respect her. She's very nice. I worked with her for the past 4.5 years, but she voted to overturn the will of the people. And we need leadership, particularly Black leadership on the council that's going to deliver for the people. And that's why I'm running for this office. That's why I ran 8 years ago, because that's not being done currently. And we need leadership that's going to be willing to pass the baton and move on to a new generation of leadership that's able to move forward on these issues.
Yes, the next question I have was from the chat. And let me just explain this very briefly. As a reporter, I know some of the inner workings of the John A. Wilson building. And one of the things that what happens is that a lot of times a resident will go to an at-large council member with a problem. And the at-large council member will say, oh, yes, we will definitely do that. You're a resident of Ward 1 or you're a resident of Ward 8, and we will work on that problem. But what happens behind the scenes is that at-large council member passes it to the ward council member. I often make a remark about DC council member, Ward 8, DC council member Trey Wright, talking about the burdens he has, but I've often noted he is not the only person who represents Ward 8 on the DC Council. As an at-large member, will you, as Harry Truman kind of chided, pass the buck? Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you very much. I am one of the few members of the council that takes my licks as they come. In other words, when people call my office, they get responses. Now, I notice in the chat, someone named Tom Donahue says that he's called my office and he hasn't gotten through or hasn't gotten a response. I'm not quite sure exactly what it was that he was looking for an answer to, but we get on a weekly basis maybe about 30 or 40 calls as it relates to housing in particular. And we frequently get referrals from the ward offices and even some of the other at-large offices as it relates to housing and senior issues. And that's probably because that's what's in our the purview of our committee.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Mr. Williams, as an at-large council member, will you pass the buck?
Short answer is no. When I worked at the council for Councilmember Robert White, we got issues directed to us from all over the city, from wards 1, 2, 3, all over the city. And I personally think that the council is too small and ward offices do need support. And so passing the buck, I don't think is the right thing. The council is way too small, doesn't have enough staff support to handle the concerns of close to 600,000 residents. And so as an at-large member, I'm going to make sure whatever requests that we have or issues that come to my office, that we're going to address them in a timely fashion and do whatever we can to make sure that the residents can navigate the agencies and get their issues resolved.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Fleming, are you going to pass the buck?
No, I'm not. I'm not going to pass the buck. We have 4 at-large council members right now. None of them live east of the river. And we hear it all the time. Where are they? I don't see them. We see them around election time, of course, but in the history of DC, we've only elected one person east of the river to an at-large seat. We've never elected someone from Ward 8 to an at-large seat. So when you think about why we have the issues we have, why do we have the results that we have at the council? That's because we don't elect people from our communities to these at-large spots. And that's exactly why I ran for this seat. I didn't run for the Ward 8 seat because I'm running so we can have someone east of the river that can that can support us citywide. That's very important.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Commissioner Gore, are you going to pass the buck?
Absolutely not. I haven't passed the buck as an ANC commissioner, sitting where I sit right now in Chevy Chase. I've used that position to establish a racial and social equity standing committee and to bring the racial equity issues all across DC into that community so that community can get engaged with the issues that other people in DC are having. This is not about electing someone from a ward. No one on this call would like for me to say that I'm running to represent west of the river. I'm running to represent east, west, and everywhere in between. I'm running on a justice platform that is focused on the people that are most marginalized in this city. We all know that our at-large council members do not do enough. I walk everywhere in this city. I'm not afraid to do so, and I'm not afraid to tackle any issue that's going to come before me. We also know that, you know, it's not just what council members do in terms of legislation, but it's what they don't do. I know the groups that have gone to different council members on the at-large platform, and they can't get a call. We know that as community members. I know that as a resident of DC. I've called at-large council members, and I know who has answered my call and who has not. And I'm not going to do that. We need new leadership that's afraid to answer the call for everyone here in DC, regardless of where they live.
Thank you, Councilmember Gore. I would like to get a sense of how we are on time. We're answering a lot of questions, but how are we in terms of time?
You have 4 minutes left.
4 minutes, okay.
5 minutes.
Okay, want to have a little bit of fun here. I'd like to do sort of like a rapid, not really super rapid, but rapid question. Would you support the idea of a youth council, and particularly a non-voting youth on the DC council? Let's start with Commissioner Gore.
Oh, I would love that idea, but I don't know if I would want that youth member non-voting. I personally, as a mom of a young one growing up in DC, I'd want them to have a vote.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. Councilmember Bonds, would you support a youth council and a non-voting youth member of the city council?
I certainly would. And I think I'm with Ms. Gore on this. I think it's important that we have a voting member. I think it's time.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Bonds. Mr. Williams, do you support a youth council and a non-voting city council member who is a youth?
I do support. I think it's a great idea to get the youth engaged, and I agree with Councilmember Bonds and Ms. Gore that they should have an actual vote. I mean, after all, we do have a youth mayor. We should have a youth council.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fleming, do you support a youth council and a non-voting youth member of the city council?
I support both, and I agree with the rest of the candidates that we should look at making that a voting member.
Thank you very much. In 30 seconds, could you describe your leadership style? Could you start, Councilmember Bonds?
I try to be reflective, reasonable, dependable, and thoughtful, and I'm always accountable, and I am trustworthy in how I approach my work at the council. I'm also compassionate, very interested in doing all that I can for those that are in great need or have, as I call it, the least amongst us, the voiceless, and those that really do want and need government to help and look out for them. But I'm also concerned about the whole, and particularly concerned about our tax base, that it can be diminished greatly if we don't get our economy moving once again. Or we will have to make some very cuts in what we are currently doing.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Mr. Williams, your leadership style.
Thank you. When I'm elected as the at-large council member, I'm going to be very pragmatic. I'm going to be collaborative. I'm going to work with my colleagues. I'm going to be open-minded and listen to a variety of points of view. I think that's particularly important when you're sitting in an at-large seat. You don't get to choose who you're going to listen to and who you're not. You have to listen to a variety of constituencies if you want to move the city forward in unity. It's the reason why I was successful in working with Robert Wright and getting our Restore the Vote bill passed, and also fair elections. And so that's my leadership style. That's why I've been effective in everything that I've done in the city.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. Mr. Fleming, 30 seconds, your leadership style.
Yes, I think I'm thoughtful, I'm bold, I'm creative, I'm a problem solver. I'm unafraid to speak truth to power. But at the same time, I'm collaborative. I think one of my weaknesses when I was younger in politics, I was more of a know-it-all. I thought I had a lot of the answers, but these problems are so complex, and the residents us collectively are much smarter than one individual. So as a council member, I'm going to be very collaborative, but I'm going to be someone that's doing the work. As you see right now, I didn't have time to sit in my house during this debate because we're out knocking doors. I've talked to 20,000 DC residents at their door, because that's the type of leadership that demonstrates that if you're elected at large, you're going to be responsive and you're going to be hardworking and you're going to be committed as a council member. And that's reflected right now on my leadership style. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleming. Commissioner Gore, your leadership style.
Yeah, and I'll just, just from my personal experience as a senior manager, leading teams across the country, my leadership style is one that builds teams. I'm very collaborative. I'm definitely a consensus builder, working on some of the nation's most top housing problems with people all across the country has really led me to develop a leadership style that really focuses on great collaboration and engagement in order to tackle some of our most pressing problems. As an supervisor of employees, I'm definitely a person that puts employees first, make sure that employees are safe, that I'm building them up to someday take over my leadership. So one of the greatest, accomplishments that I've had in my leadership role is actually getting my employees promoted and taking over the role once I retire. So that's the type of person I am.
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. And I would like to thank all of the candidates, Councilmember Bonds, Mr. Williams, Mr. Fleming, and Commissioner Gore for this outstanding Democratic at-large council panel. And back to you, Troy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, James. Thank you to our at-large council candidates. A very robust conversation indeed. I did want to note that looks like we have a little bit of breaking news from that debate. And so I just wanted to note that Councilmember Bond said that the council is possibly looking at emergency legislation, didn't commit to it, but said it's possibly looking at emergency legislation to allow, I guess it's to clarify the AG bill. And if they do that, that may actually allow for Kenyon McDuffie, current councilmember Kenyon McDuffie from Ward 5 to run for AG. As you know, he was ruled unqualified to run last week by the DC Board of Elections. And right now, Councilmember McDuffie is appealing that decision to the DC Court of Appeals. And so hopefully they will move expeditiously to a resolution on that matter. But I guess regardless of what happens there, Councilmember Bonds had said that the council may, in fact, hold a hearing on this, and it might even be at the emergency level so that they can get it done quickly. And then the other candidates there.
Mr. Presswood, I really think you need to clarify my response. I was responding to the question that I was asked. And in responding, I said may, as opposed to anything that you or I know. I do not know, but I do know that in the process of government. There may be something that advances, some law that advances to, not law, but bill that would advance to the council that would cause us to look at it and take a position. And that was the point that I was making. And no other point was I making.
Just to be clear, thank you, Councilmember
Thank
Bonds.
you.
Just so that I'm clear, I did say may. I didn't say
Okay,
will. I didn't say shall. I didn't say it was imminent on Monday. I did say may. So I want to make sure I'm clear, and thank you for clarifying. But I thought I used the right words by saying may. And so I just wanted to just put that out there because we know that is something that is currently up for discussion right here in our city. And the other note here was that all of the candidates did say that they were in support of Initiative 82. And so we just wanted to just provide some clarity on that. Thank you to all of the candidates for being here. And I did want to also just once again thank all of our sponsors from the DC Democratic Party, as well as East of the River Hill Rag magazines. I think we have our connection fixed now with the chairman of the DC Democratic Party, Charles Wilson. We've tried to connect with him a couple of times, and I think we finally got that fixed. So Charles, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, everyone. I wish I could be in my house watching virtually, but I'm on my phone because I'm here at the Ward 5 Democrats mayoral forum in Northeast. But want to bring greetings on behalf of the DC Democratic Party. Want to give a shout out to the Ward 8 Democrats, the executive leadership of the Ward 8 Democrats, the chair of the Ward 8 Democrats, Troy Presswood, and everybody who surrounds to make this kind of thing happen. I definitely salute the entire leadership of the group. Want to encourage everyone watching, yes, vote, participate in these conversations, but also find a way to get involved in the Ward 8 Democrats and in your local community. That is really the only way that we're able to really advance the conversations in our communities that when we get involved. I've really enjoyed the conversations listening to many of the candidates, especially the at-large members, because some of the ideas that are being discussed today, we've discussed as a party. And we're hoping to kind of take this up in the coming months. And we're encouraging you to participate in these conversations with us. Please stay connected to the Ward 8 Democrats and the DC Democratic Party at dcdemocraticparty.org. And we look forward to seeing you get involved. Thank you so much, Troy.
All right, well, thank you so much, Chairman Wilson, for joining us. We know there's a lot going on in our city today, and we certainly hope that our friends over and our neighbors over in Ward 5 are having a really good forum. I just want to note that we too will have such a forum for mayor and for attorney general and for shadow representative in a little bit over a month. Mr. Moderators, back to you.
Thank you very much, Troy Presswood, for your outstanding putting together of this forum and your outstanding leadership of the Ward 8 Democrats. We are now here with the two candidates for the DC Council Chairman's position. As you know, this is the chairman, this is the position which presides over the DC Council. It is equitable in the states to the Speaker of the House or the Speaker of the Assembly. So obviously this is a very, very important position. And it is critical that DC residents understand the role of this position and how it influences their everyday lives. We have with us two people today. We have DC Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, who is running for re-election, and we have his challenger, Commissioner Erin Palmer. I will go over the rules again. We will have 1 minute opening statements, and throughout the debate, there will be 1 minute responses to questions, and 30 seconds. At some point, we're going to go down to 30-second responses to questions. If a candidate mentions another candidate, that candidate has the option, and let me stress this, has the option to rebut a response. That is an option to rebut. It's not automatic. And there are questions. The questions can be put in our Q&A in the Zoom or in the hashtag Ward 8 votes. We have an excellent timekeeper who's doing very well in terms of keeping time. Please do not filibuster. Please get to the point in terms of your responses. I have two quick questions. Presswood talked about issues that are going on through presently today, shuffling some papers. I'll start with Chairman Mendelson on this particular question. As you know, Mr. Chairman, Kenny McDuffie was kicked off the ballot by the DC Board of Elections because he did not qualify for Attorney General because he did not meet the statutory requirements. And Ms. Palmer, I definitely want to get your thoughts on this, but Mr. Chairman, do you support that contention of the DC Board of Elections? Would you support emergency legislation to put Mr. McDuffie back on the ballot and possibly make changes, if you can, with the way it was brought up, if you can, to amend it to make sure people like Mr. McDuffie can run again in the future?
Thank you for the question. Yesterday I joined with other council members and former council members in filing an amicus brief that supports Kenya McDuffie's appeal. I disagree with the board's ruling. I am very clear in my mind, since I was the author of the legislation creating the independent elected attorney general, that we never intended that a council member would be excluded if they otherwise met qualifications, meaning being an attorney and a member of the bar. I do not think it would be appropriate at this time, I mean on April 23rd, to be considering emergency legislation, because I think many people would see that as changing the rules. And we need to see how this plays out with the Court of Appeals.
Thank you. Commissioner Palmer, your response to what's going on.
Well, I agree that I think that there's some appearance of impropriety should there be emergency legislation to change the outcome in this case, and that it is now in court proceedings and those proceedings should move forward. I do think there was opportunity before now to correct for some legislative ambiguity, and that has been on the record for some time. And it may be worth correcting that ambiguity going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. My second question, and please make this very quick, it has to do with a bill you're familiar with, Mr. Chairman, the Delegate Voting Rights Act of 2022 that you have co-authored with Councilmember Che. Just basically in 30 seconds for this one, could you talk about why this bill is important? And Ms. Palmer, your response.
The bill is important because we're trying to strengthen the role of our congressional delegate, who should be a full-fledged congresswoman. As you know, she can vote in the committee of the whole and in committees when the Democrats are in control, and the Republicans take that away every time they have control. This bill would change the law to make it clear that she could vote, including on the House floor, if the measure before the House deals specifically with the district. This is all about trying to strengthen her role. What I really would like to see is statehood and the statehood bill to go through, but I don't believe we sit around and do nothing waiting. We instead do everything we can to strengthen our local autonomy as well as representation in Congress.
And I went out of place, but this is so exciting to me. Commissioner Palmer, could you respond to that question, please?
Sure. I think I have a similar response, that mechanisms to enhance the authority that we have of our voting representation make sense. Until we can achieve full statehood, we have to do what we can to increase our power at the national level. And this seems like a good move. Hopefully we'll see more things like it.
Thank you. Now, we're going to do opening statements. And I'd like to reverse the order. Commissioner Palmer, your 1 minute opening statement, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Erin Palmer. I'm running for DC Council Chairwoman. I'm a mom of 3 children. By profession, I'm an ethics and accountability lawyer, and I'm an advisory neighborhood commissioner in Ward 4. And I'm running for DC Council Chairwoman to bring new energy, vision, and compassion to solving DC's challenges. I bring deep professional experience and dedication to good government and an ethical and accountable council. That's why I'm running as a fair elections candidate in this race and rejecting corporate donations. It's also why I've put out a DC Council accountability plan for a better, more ethical, more modern, more effective DC Council. I also believe in high quality, equitable government services for all DC residents, something that we don't always see and something that the government should deliver on. And finally, I believe in meeting basic needs as rights, things like housing, education, and healthcare. And I believe in that in part because stable and secure communities are safe communities. So investing in basic needs uplifts our neighbors and makes us safer overall. And also as a measure to withstand shocks, things like COVID, and ensure that we're more resilient. So thank you so much. And I look forward to the rest of the program. Thank you to the Ward 8 Democrats.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. Chairman Mendelson, your opening statement, please, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for having this forum. I'll begin with this. I am no stranger to Ward 8. Ever since I was first elected, I come to Ward 8 all the time. I represent the entire city, and I make a point of being accessible to everyone, regardless of where they live. This election is not just about a council member, but it's about the leader of the council, of the legislative branch. But let me say, as a council member, I have consistently delivered on progressive values, such as authoring and getting to the council universal paid leave. Last year, legislation to enact baby bonds for kids born in DC in poverty, turning the earned income tax credit to guaranteed income program. Those are just a few examples. As chair, I've been able to get controversial legislation to the council time and again, like the comprehensive plan last year, or income tax reform over a mayor's veto several years ago. I ask for your support on June 21st. I welcome your questions today and thank you for your participation. My website is mendelsonforchairman.com.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My first question from the audience, which is the most important questions, has to deal with Stormamaya Denson Jackson Act. This is the young lady who died at the charter school, and the parent is trying to get, sue to get some money for a wrongful situation, but it's been blocked because of legislation. I'm sure you all understand what the situation is. Do you support moving a bill which is caught up in Charles Allen's committee, moving that bill forward? And by the way, what the lead attorney for this Stormamaya Denson Jackson Act is former Ward 8 Council Member LaRuby May. We'll go in order. Chairman Mendelson, could you please respond?
Sure. Can I give more than just a yes/no question answer?
Oh, no. Yes, you have 1 minute, sir.
Okay, thank you. Well, what this bill is about is recognizing that the legacy of racism is built into actuarial tables regarding life expectancy that then deal with how much a person's life is worth. It's horrible to talk about this, but how much a person's life is worth when there is a tort. And that's the situation here. I've talked to LaRuby May. I've told her my support. I've talked to Councilmember Allen. Councilmember Allen has assured me that that legislation will come out of his committee after we are done with the budget, and I will be supportive of that legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Palmer, your response.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I very much support this legislation and its efforts to correct for some very deeply built-in racist valuations of people's lives. That part is quite heartbreaking. I understand that either this exact legislation or something similar was proposed before and stalled And it seems that this current version has been kind of sitting around and stalling as well. And I'm hopeful that it moves quickly and moves out of committee. I don't see any reason for the delay. I don't understand what the delay would be. This is a best practice. It's something that should move forward very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Palmer. And I'll go back to Commissioner Palmer. As chair of the DC Council, will you work with the mayor, whoever that person is, to solve the problem of crime in the city?
Yes, I think it is very important that all of our government entities are working together collaboratively to address community safety. It is an issue that impacts all of us. We all deserve safe and stable communities, and it's an issue that we all have to be focused on. And I think that involves greater collaboration and coordination, not just between the DC Council and the mayor, but also the Office of the Attorney General, so that we're coordinating all our efforts to prevent violence and to respond to it. And I'm confident that we can move past some of the dividing rhetoric about how we talk about public safety to recognize that this is an issue that we all care about and all benefit from having safe communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, would you like to respond, please?
Sure, and I'll begin that this is an issue where there's a contrast between us. I've never called for defunding the police. I will say that I would first work with the chief and ask the chief, what resources do you need to close cases? Because the police need to move more quickly and increase the case closure rate to get these murderers off the street. For example, I will work with the mayor. Yes, I will work with the mayor to press the U.S. attorney to prosecute cases more aggressively. Think of the robberies that were in the news a week ago about those dogs, and the police department caught suspects and the U.S. attorney dropped the charges the same day. We need to press the U.S. attorney to be more aggressive with its prosecutions. But let me add, in addition to giving the resources that the MPD needs to close its cases, we need to ensure better accountability from our police. I introduced a bill that would establish a deputy auditor for public safety so that there will be improved accountability with regard to our police. We want police, but we want them to be policing sensitively to the community.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I go back to you, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot of talk about.
May I respond to that one since there was a reference?
Go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
No trouble. The chairman made a reference to defund the police, and I would note that our advisory neighborhood commission passed a resolution about divesting from MPD and investing in community supports and services. That was a very thorough and robust resolution. It involved a lot of very important community and leader conversations. And the things included in that resolution are by and large the things that ultimately showed up in the Police Reform Commission report. So our commission did work that was in some ways ahead of the work of the Police Reform Commission and very much aligned with what they are currently recommending. I'd also note that in terms of case closures, we should be talking about the crime lab, which has lost its accreditation.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. Let me go to, in the proper order, to Chairman Mendelson. There was a question about a new jail in the District of Columbia and possibly the new jail being in Ward 8. Is that true? Do you support that? And in general, how do you support returning citizens in your position, sir?
Thank you. I have to say that there is a proposal that the mayor has put in the budget for funding the construction of a new jail, and I support that. And the issue that the council is looking at is whether we can move up the timetable. The mayor's borrowed every last penny available, and so it's difficult to just say we will move it up, but we should move it up if we can do that. Her proposal does not include relocating it to Ward 8. That has sometimes been discussed, but that is not currently on the table, and I wouldn't take a position on that without there being a full discussion, including the community. I remember years ago when there was controversy over locating a jail in Oxen Run, No, the community would need to be involved. With regard to returning citizens, and I'm running out of time, I have supported legislation of a pilot program through Jubilee Housing to provide affordable housing to returning citizens, specifically to returning citizens and their families, to help them re-enter. There are other ways, working with groups like Voices for a Second Chance, very supportive to help with people to re-enter. There isn't enough time for me to cover everything, but this is a very important issue, not only important to the individuals returning, but also important if we want to reduce crime, because we don't want these folks to recidivate. And if we help them re-enter, they're less likely to recidivate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Palmer, what do you think about a new jail and a new jail possibly in Ward 8? And from your position as chair, how would you support returning citizens?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I think a new jail has become necessary. We've seen just deplorable conditions at the existing jail, some problems that have existed for years, and are frankly the result of some lack of accountability in terms of the quality and services at the jail. So I think we have gotten to the point where we cannot really rehabilitate the existing jail. We need a new structure that can be a healthy and well-run institution for people. I'm not aware of efforts to locate a jail in Ward 8. I think as a general matter, that doesn't make sense in terms of locations and siting, but I would also have to see some additional details about that. In terms of support for returning citizens like all of us need to have our basic needs met, need to have safe, stable, and secure housing. That can be a challenge in terms of making sure it's affordable and also that it comes with the necessary services. And something that we know is that housing that comes with services costs money. That's an investment. But if you really want to support people in having safe, stable, and secure housing, you make that investment. And also jobs and education are an additional component to supporting returning citizens, having fulsome job opportunities, as well as access to educational opportunities, whether that's community college or vocational or otherwise, are extremely important. And hopefully we can continue those investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. Sticking in the neighborhood of the jail, there's the RFK site. And there's a lot of excitement about possibly bringing the Washington Commanders back to the district, and possibly at that, well, let me just say the preference site for many people is the RFK site. Commissioner Palmer, do you support a taxpayer-funded stadium for the Commanders, as well as economic development surrounding that area with taxpayers' money?
I do not support taxpayer-funded stadium at the site. I think there's much better use of the land, and that it's a very big opportunity to provide a lot of housing and affordable housing and deeply affordable housing, and a lot of opportunity to use and develop green space in service to the community. I think it can be a community serving space focused on housing and green spaces and some environmental infrastructure as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chairman Mendelson, RFK site, Washington Commanders, and economic development surrounding that area.
I would like to see the Commanders come back into the city, but I do not support a taxpayer-funded stadium. I would support some public dollars going into infrastructure improvements, but that would be much less expensive. With regard to economic development around a stadium, I think that needs to be more carefully planned and considered. A lot of that land is parkland. It's along the Anacostia. We really should build up the Anacostia as an attractive amenity to residents on both sides of the river. But let me say this, while I said I would support limited dollars for infrastructure, I will not support anything with regard to bringing back the Commanders until the investigative reports are published with regard to the allegations, the sexual harassment allegations involving the owner and the management and the whole organization of the Commanders. That report has to be released first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just got a question from a very important person in the Ward 8 Democrats, and I'll just try to summarize this, and I will direct this to the chairman. And to help reconnect underserved communities to opportunities and resources downtown, do you support expanding the DC streetcar system across DC to approach the visions laid out by Mayor Barry, Mayor Williams, Mayor Fenty, and Mayor Gray? Mr. Chairman.
Interesting question. I support, and I've been very clear and consistent about this, support completing the Benning Road line east of the river, connecting with a metro station. I do not support bringing back, revitalizing, resurrecting the full 22-mile system, or even having a line that goes to Georgetown. And I would add as well, not to correct the person who asked the question, but I don't recall Mayor Barry ever discussing the streetcar when he was mayor, or Anthony Williams when he was mayor. This was something that came about when Adrian Fenty was mayor without any public involvement. And it went from being extremely popular to becoming politically very unpopular. Even though it is very unpopular, it should be completed east of the river.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Palmer, your response to the question.
Yes, thank you so much. I support the streetcar project. I support the expansion. I think the streetcar has had something of a troubled history, and expanding streetcar service should be done intentionally, should be done well, should be done thoughtfully so that it's high quality infrastructure and transit service. And I think something that gets lost in the discussion about the streetcar is we are very focused on the streetcar as a mechanism to plug in a hole in terms of a transit desert. And we should be addressing public transportation and transit issues more broadly and holistically, and communities east of the river deserve better transit access overall. It's something we should really be focused on, not just with regard to the streetcar, but with regard to other public transportation services like the bus primarily. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for your response, Commissioner Palmer. Commissioner Palmer, I'll go back to you. In Ward 8, there are deteriorating street conditions, and residents are very concerned about that. As the chair, what would you do to address that? And there's also a growing traffic concern, particularly in historic Anacostia. As the chair of the committee, of the council, will you pass the buck and attempt to work on these transportation problems in Ward 8?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. I have worked a lot on traffic safety and transportation issues as an advisory neighborhood commissioner. It's one of those issues that has unified commissioners across the city, because there is a growing consensus that there's too much traffic, that the cars go too fast, and that it's not safe for us, for our children, for seniors. And it has the potential to get worse based on kind of declining public transit service and increasing development. So more people and more concentration. So I think we need to really focus on this issue, primarily to slow cars down. We need to be good about implementing some of these traffic safety infrastructure mechanisms and following through on recent proposed legislation about raised crosswalks and traffic calming around schools. And it's just a very important issue that involves having fixed attention on traffic safety and infrastructure, and also empowering the council to do better oversight in that regard. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, as you know, there are deteriorating street conditions on the streets in Ward 8, as well as the traffic, particularly in historic Anacostia, is emerging as a problem. As chairman, will you in your office work on this problem, or will you pass the buck?
Of course I will work on the problem. Thank you, James. So let me be local and then let me go global. Locally, if there are problems with particular streets, please contact my office and we will put pressure on DDOT to get those streets fixed. Similarly, if there are problems with traffic congestion, just as with ANCs, contact my office and we will put pressure on DDOT to make improvements. To speak more globally, I am concerned that we have enough dollars in the capital budget to ensure that the streets are maintained in good condition. I will add as well that legislation is pending that would require some improvements, especially around schools, to change the geometry, such as raised crosswalks, to through geometry, through physical means, reduce the speed of cars and so forth. I co-introduced that legislation, so of course I support it. You know, an important facet of our transportation system is metro, public transit. And I've put some good members on the transit, on the WMATA board, including former board member Stephanie Giddaby, who is a resident of Ward 8. And I've looked to have riders of the bus, in particular, be members of the Metro board so that residents, particularly those who don't have cars, have access to better public transit than they've had in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go back to you on this question, Mr. Chairman, because there is in the public a perception that there's a schism on the council between the progressives and the pro-business people. Now, Mr. Chairman, is there a schism in terms of the progressives and the pro-business people? And how do you work together to move the council forward in terms of legislation and procedure when you have these two competing blocks?
Well, I do think that you can point to some members and say that they tend to vote more in support of business proposals, and others who tend to pretty typically vote the other way. In my view, it's important that we find a balance. I think that is important across the board with regard to legislating, to recognize that we can't legislate based on ideology, but rather we have to make compromises and we have to find the right balance. It goes back to something I said at the beginning about being accessible. One has to be open to hearing from stakeholders on all sides of an issue and be willing to find what is in the best interest of all stakeholders, not just simply doing what business wants, and not just simply doing what those who don't like businesses want, but rather both. Remember, when we're talking about workers in this city and making sure they have a decent wage, like a minimum wage, which by the way, I helped get through the council, well, there are no workers if there aren't employers. So we've got to have both. And I just can't emphasize this enough. It's the requirement on a good legislator is to be willing to look for the proper balance. And that's certainly what I've tried to do over the years. And as chair, to do that as well as to get a majority vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Palmer, as you know, there's a public perception that there's a schism on the council between the progressives and the pro-business council members. As the chair of the council, how will you work with your colleagues in order to move forward?
Thank you. I really appreciate this question, and I think it's very important and something that we don't talk about enough. I believe in institutional integrity and accountability. So the DC Council existing as an institution beyond any one individual council member, and that you invest in the institution as itself, not in individuals. It stands on its own. And this is rooted in my professional background, having worked for the federal judiciary and on accountability reforms there, and feeling that it's hard to get judges to hold themselves accountable, but they were dedicated to it on the belief that the institution stood strong when everyone was accountable. So part of what I love about being an advisory neighborhood commissioner is that we're nonpartisan. So we are able to talk about issues in a way where we find common ground and move things forward, largely on our commission on a consensus basis, just by kind of shifting aside the politics and the dividing lines to talk about the things that we agree on, the common problems that we see, and the solutions that we can move forward as a group. And I think that's part of my leadership and management style in terms of building consensus and collaboration. I have a deeply held belief in good government and accountability. And I think that also helps to strip away some of the politics when you're talking about issues, because you talk about process and doing things well and doing things in service of DC residents. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. There's a word here in DC that's almost become a bad word. It's the G word, gentrification. And gentrification is really quite broad. People like to put it in nice little boxes. But in general, Commissioner Palmer, what would you do as chairman to try to stem the displacement of residents who have to leave the city because they just simply cannot afford to live here?
Yeah. Yes, thank you for that question. The displacement side of this is really what is in some ways violent. This idea that you've become removed from your place of birth or where you've grown your community and are connected. And I think it ties to another sentiment that I've heard very commonly in talking to residents and doing meet and greets, which is that a feeling that amenities and services only come to a neighborhood when it's being gentrified, and that's not fair and it's hurtful. And so I have a belief in supporting and acting in a way that builds around neighborhoods and communities. So this idea that we invest in neighborhoods as their specific culturally vibrant places and build around neighborhood hubs in terms of providing services and amenities. And I think by providing the services and amenities, you go a long way toward keeping the neighborhood whole. And then you pair that with very strong affordable housing efforts and efforts to keep people in the neighborhood. And that's not necessarily to the exclusion of new people coming to a neighborhood, but I really value the idea of growing around our neighborhoods as a way to keep them whole and keep their vibrancy and culture intact. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, in terms of the G word, gentrification, specifically displacement of residents who can't afford to live here. As chairman, what can you do to try to stop that from happening?
Well, first, we want to stop the displacement. And when the comprehensive plan moved through the council a year ago, we put language in there to require the zoning commission to confront the issue of displacement and to reduce or minimize it. In addition, if we're talking about homeowners, there are different strategies, such as looking at real property tax relief. What can we do to ensure that homeowners are not taxed out of living in the district? In addition, for some areas like in historic Anacostia, there are homeowner grants, and I have every year with the budget looked at whether there's enough money in the budget to help lower income residents who live in historic districts to be able to maintain their properties through homeowner grants. Affordability measures such as maintaining rent control. I got through the extension on rent control. I've always supported since I was a tenant activist at McLean Gardens many, many years ago. But in addition, the supply of affordable housing. So we're going to increase by at least double the funding for the Housing Production Trust Fund this year, which produces more housing. And that's a big part of the problem here. If we have an adequate supply of housing, we wouldn't see the market pressures that are forcing people out. But there are other initiatives in housing preservation, using dollars to help with repairs of rental properties, and also dollars to purchase, for the government to purchase affordability covenants to maintain properties as affordable. I am no stranger, as I said to Ward 8 a week ago, I was out at Marbury Plaza looking at the conditions in that building and following up with the Attorney General who sued the owner. These are all strategies to try to help ensure that people can continue to live in the city and also can continue to live in decent housing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for my next question, I'll go back to the chairman. in some budget cycles, the mayor submitted a budget that's balanced, but some of your colleagues have managed to push for tax increases. And there's even a call now for tax increases for wealthier district residents. Mr. Chairman, do you support a tax increase for this budget or do you support tax increases in general for this budget?
I do not support a tax increase this year, and I am unaware of a move to increase taxes this year. They were increased last year. I recently made appointments to establish the Tax Revision Commission and appointed the former mayor, Anthony Williams, as chair. And they have about a year to come forward with a comprehensive review of our taxes to, among other things, look at whether the tax burden is equitable, lower income people paying a lower percentage of their income than wealthier individuals who should pay a higher percentage of their income on taxes. And I'm talking about all taxes. I'd mentioned in my opening statement that a few years ago, I pushed through over a mayoral veto reform to the income tax, which is already progressive, but it's the overall burden that I want the Tax Revision Commission to look at. We should be raising taxes thoughtfully if we're going to do it. But this past year, without the tax increase, we ended the year with $1 billion surplus. That was $1 billion, in case anybody didn't hear what I was saying, $1 billion surplus, and yet we raised taxes. And we shouldn't be so quick to do that because there will be times when we need to raise taxes when our revenues are dropping, and I will not be afraid to raise taxes then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, should we raise taxes for this year's budget on the wealthy or just raise taxes in general?
Yes, so with regard to this year's budget, I think I'd have to see more details about what the tax increase would be and what it would go toward. But I want to go back to the vote on the tax increase on the very wealthy last year, which was a marginal tax increase on individuals making over $250,000. And that was funding to go toward a pay increase for early childhood educators and funding for permanent supportive housing to end chronic homelessness. So those were very tangible, positive outcomes that were needed and not otherwise funded. And the current council chair voted against that tax increase, but then is very happy to take credit for the outcomes of increasing early childhood educator pay and affordable housing. So I think we need to have a discussion about what increased taxes will accomplish, why they're needed, where there are maybe other efficiencies, and also be honest about whether we're supporting them and why. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Your name was mentioned. Do you want to respond, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I do. You know, there was rhetoric around the tax increase last year, which was part of the typical, what I'm going to call distortive rhetoric of politicians. So I made it clear at the time that for those individuals who voted against the tax increase, because as I said, our revenues were way above what the budget, that voting against the tax increase was not the same as voting against the programs. So, and we could have funded those programs out of existing dollars since, as I said, we had $1 billion surplus. I am very proud of the work I've done on early childhood educator. We set up a task force following last year's budget. That task force has come up with recommendations, and we are putting that into the law this year as well as the budget this year so that early childhood educators will be getting a pay increase. Instead of being minimum wage jobs, they actually will be better paying, recognizing the training that they get as educators.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How are we doing on time, Mr. Presswood?
We have 5 more minutes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. We're going to go to a rapid, it's not a lightning round, but a rapid question. And please keep your responses under 30 seconds. There's been a buzz about having a youth member of the DC Council non-voting. Do you support that, Chairman Mendelson?
The first I heard of it was earlier with the at-large candidates. I have to say, based on what I know, I would not be supportive of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Palmer, would you be supportive of a youth non-voting member of the City Council?
Yes, I would. I think we should take efforts to bring young people into our democratic processes, and this sounds like a great idea. I'd love to consider it further.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Palmer, Mr. Mendelson has a rule that once you are elected to the council, you cannot chair a committee at least for 2 years. And he says, you need to get to know how the council works. Should you become the chair, will you retain that rule or will you change it?
I'm open to consideration of an alternative. And I think that with some of the proposals in my DC Council Accountability Plan that would strengthen institutional knowledge and capacity building at the council, it could potentially make sense to have newer members able to serve in those positions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, are you willing to change your rule in terms of freshman lawmakers not being able to chair committees?
Well, I'm not about to make news, but the rule has never been a rule in writing that's been hard and fast, even though I have not appointed a freshman as a chair of a committee. And it's because what I have seen over the years is that because the council is so chairman oriented, and I mean committee chair oriented, the role of a committee chair is extraordinarily important and really requires an understanding of all the issues and understanding of the process. And I mentioned before, for instance, recognizing understanding the need to hear from different stakeholders, understanding the need to be accessible, understanding the need to find balance and compromise. That comes with some time. And the first year on the council, I've seen over and over again where mistakes have been made in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, let's go national just a little bit. Do you support the Green New Deal?
Generally, yes.
And just a quick summation of why you support the Green New Deal.
Well, let's see. It promotes the environment. It also promotes jobs. It links jobs to green infrastructure. It's a progressive piece of legislation. Do I need to say more?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Palmer, do you support the Green New Deal?
Yes, I support the Green New Deal. I think we have to take some dramatic action to account for climate change. And I love that the Green New Deal incorporates good quality, high paying jobs within the framework of environmentalism. There's a lot of opportunity to grow jobs around green infrastructure and mitigating climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Palmer, as you probably know, DC Councilmember Vincent Gray has a bill, which I believe has become law in terms of encouraging grocers to set up shop in underserved areas, particularly Ward 7 and Ward 8. It's making traction, but as council chair, what could you do or can you do in order to try to, and I realize this is really an executive function, but what can you do to encourage more full service groceries in Ward 7 and Ward 8 and parts of Ward 5?
Yeah, I think at the outset, what I'd say is that the law around the grocery store incentives can be tightened because we've seen that it's not actually achieving its desired end. It's too broad. So for example, that targeted subsidy was used to bring a Whole Foods to Walter Reed, which is in my neighborhood, and a Wegmans to Ward 3, and that's not achieving the desired end. And part of the challenge is if you have something targeted for 7, 8, and 5, and then you open up these other pockets, the grocery stores are going to go to the other pockets. So it doesn't achieve the desired end if you create carve-outs that mean that the subsidy won't actually benefit what it's intended to benefit. So I do think there's room to tighten and better target those incentives so they actually achieve their desired end.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, basically the same question.
Well, I recognize that there is a huge need for more grocery stores east of the river, given the fact that there are, 2, maybe 3? I have been supportive of legislation in the past that would authorize more dollars in the capital budget to support grocery stores locating in Ward 7 and 8. I don't think that the solution is to better target the subsidy as in to narrow it, because that subsidy is available citywide. And the fact is a grocery store will go to Georgia Avenue, but won't go to Ward 7. So what we need is to focus on what will get the grocery stores to Ward 7 and 8. That means meeting with the store. So I did last year meet with representatives from Safeway. What would it take to get you to open another store east of the river? That kind of conversation needs to take place more broadly. That is, as you said, James, more of an executive function to have those negotiations, although I have had those discussions with different grocery stores. And then having that discussion to tailor for those grocery stores financial assistance. So it's not just changing the statute, because the statute right now is already available east of the river. It is talking to these grocery store chains, finding out specifically what their need is, and then targeting financial assistance to get them located east of the river.
Thank you very much. We are now going to closing statements. Everybody has a minute for closing statements, and we'll go in proper order. Chairman Mendelson.
Well, again, I want to thank the Ward 8 Democrats for doing this. You have a long tradition of activism in the political arena, one of the better ward Democratic committees. I hope you've gotten some sense from the last hour, the fact that I do understand the breadth of issues. I do very much care about the concerns underlying those issues. I do want to make a difference in this city. We can be a better city. And I don't mean by that to criticize the city we have, but we can be doing so much better. We could be turning the corner on public safety, and we need to. We could be improving faster our public schools, and we need to. And I'm committed to these things, but I also want to emphasize that I have time and again delivered on progressive values, whether we're talking about universal paid leave or baby bonds. I've been able to deliver those things. Whether we're talking about gun control, I delivered changes to our gun control law after the Supreme Court struck it down. And last year, changed the legislation around ghost guns to protect it from a judicial challenge. I care deeply about the city. I hope that you all can see that in me. You know that I'm no stranger to Ward 8, and I will continue to be there to work with you and to represent and to represent you. And I ask for your support on June 21st. My campaign website is mendelsonforchairman.com. mendelsonforchairman.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Palmer, your closing statement.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Ward 8 Democrats, and thank you to our expert moderator. This has been a really wonderful forum, and I appreciate anyone who has stuck it out for this final panel of the forum. I really appreciate your time. I learned so much from every aspect of running for office. I am a big believer in institutional accountability and good government. That's my thing. I hold it very close to my heart. It's my professional background. I believe in good government as a daily practice. I'm a fair elections candidate. I'm the only fair elections candidate in this race, and that means I'm rejecting corporate donations, and I am accountable to DC residents. I am engaged with and accountable to DC residents. We know that DC is a city rich in resources, but we know that there's chronic disinvestment in certain neighborhoods, primarily in Ward 8 and Ward 7 and Ward 5, and that this is the result of intentional policy decisions, and we have to take proactive efforts and really move government in a different direction. I believe that values-driven leadership can change our path, can make us operate as a government in service of residents, and that we can meet people's basic needs as rights. We can make sure everyone has safe, stable, and secure housing. We can fully fund our schools, which we haven't been doing. We can assure proper medical care for everyone, whether it's giving birth as you grow up and need mental health supports and as you age. And I believe that I can lead with the values to meet people's basic needs and in service of DC residents. And I'm really excited for the opportunity. You can learn more about me at erinfordc.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer, and thank you for you both in participating in this candidate forum. And thank you, as Ms. Palmer kind of alluded to, those of us who stuck it out